Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you all for coming. It's nice to have you here, Gordon and Chloe. We're here with the talk user testing without breaking the bank. And Gordon Haywood, the design principal and digital, and Chloe Cheng, the product designer and digital as well. So thank you both for being here. And yeah, I'd like to take it away. It'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, hello and welcome. Hope everybody's well. And thanks for having us along to hear our talk and a bit of a demonstration as well about some of the ways you can do user testing without breaking the bank. The first thing to say, it's nothing to do with banking. So if that disappoints anyone, apologies now. Instead, it's going to be about how to get the best use out of commercially available usability testing tools. Whether you're just trying them out, you don't want to actually kind of commit any money to them, or you don't maybe yet have the budget to pay for a full cost subscription. We could move on, Chloe. So I'm Gordon, and this is my colleague Chloe, and we're both from And Digital, a UK-wide digital consultancy. We're both based in Edinburgh. And we're part of a team that helps design and build digital products for clients in Scotland across public, private and third sector. But we've got a wider mission as well of helping to close the UK's digital skills gap, which, as many of you know, is a critical kind of enabler to UK growth. We're both also volunteers with the Scottish Tech Army, and some of you, I guess, will know us from one of those two places. So we've been supporting UX and design with the STA for a good few years now on a range of projects, and today kind of gives us both a bit of a chance to share some best practice with you and hopefully give you some tools in the armory when championing for user-centered design on your own initiatives. So also just a very quick shout out as well, because some of the work in here is things that have been done with other people from within and particularly one of our colleagues, Ari, who's one of our other user researchers, was also involved in some of this presentation previously when we've run it. So just a bit of a shout out to them. So yeah, moving on to today's talk, just a quick summary initially really about what the session's I'm going to go through and hopefully what you'll take away from it. So primarily that the big thing here is that there's a cost and a risk around not user testing. So in designing for the third sector and with charities and so on, that might mean that vulnerable or disadvantaged users don't get the service that they need or deserve. And it also means there's potentially missed opportunities to learn about users, their behaviors, their opportunities. The opportunities to innovate as well are potentially kind of reduced. And it may be felt, I guess, particularly in the third sector, that there isn't budget perhaps to do this. And some of the tools are kind of big and expensive, and some of them definitely are. But it's very possible, therefore, that you might decide to shortcut that part of the product design process. But we're hoping that today we can show you that there's still ways that you can get value out of tools, and you can still give a kind of first-class experience when you're designing for the third sector. So it's not a step you necessarily need to skip over. We're going to tell you some things about usability testing, about how it fits into a design process, a proven process, and how you can make that work, potentially in Scottish Tech Army projects or other initiatives outside that. We're also going to show you some things, so particularly around how you use one of what's our go-to tools. I'd stress right up front that we don't get any money for these tools. This is just a tool that we happen to quite like using, and often we use it on the free tier. Even within our kind of commercial work. So it's something that can definitely be made to work. And then we're going to have a bit of a chat, I guess, about any challenges that you yourselves might be facing, or things where usability testing could potentially help. So just in terms of what we will go through, we're going to do a bit of, well, there'll be an introduction to usability testing throughout this presentation. There's a little bit of upfront that I'll do just to set the scene, particularly in kind of low cost, a low-cost model, let's call it, where you don't have the budget for all the big tools. I'll dip in and out of that a little bit as we go as well, and Chloe will as well. And then we're going to give you an overview. I know it sounds very dry, a desk booking system, and also just to say that the marketing collateral, the marketing collateral there, there's a good reason for it. It wasn't just put in just for the branding. There's a reason. There's lots of smiley people sitting around desks, and as we get into the example that we're going to show you, there's a little bit of interactive activity in that as well. You'll see why we've got that and why we'll kind of bring that to life for you. We're going to introduce Maze, the tool that we quite like to use. There are lots of other tools out there as well, and I will mention some of them which do have free options as well, but Maze is quite generous on its free tier, and you can do some quite good things with it. We'll give you a bit of a live demo, and then we'll open up into a bit of Q&A. But I would stress that everything that we show you today is on Maze's free tier, so it's things that you could take away and use today if you wanted. For those that are STA volunteers, today's talk, I guess, fits into an approach that we quite often take on volunteer projects, certainly the ones I've been involved with, where we follow a design thinking process. This is all about moving between divergent and convergent thinking. So you're kind of going big on ideas, and then you're narrowing down onto something to kind of take forward. And we talk about the double diamond, going through that process twice, where you're going from the problem space, uncovered maybe through early generative user research, as we call it, or market research. You maybe don't quite know at that point what you want to do, but you kind of go out there and you ask the questions, maybe through observational studies or conducting interviews, a lot of the traditional qualitative research, and then turning those into or those insights rather into more focused opportunities. Often we talk about doing things like how might we statements, where we turn our problems into opportunities, and then we begin to explore what might be the range of different solution ideas or concepts for solutions to solve those very focused problems using design. And then we test the best of those ideas, ideally with real world users in their real world context. And over time, we kind of gain confidence that our solutions do indeed meet the intended problem to solve. And we try to de-risk the more kind of expensive and harder to undo process of turning those ideas into code or other kinds of products. By the time you get to that stage, it's quite painful to have to undo it if it turns out that it was you'd kind of gone in the wrong direction. So in practice, there's lots of kind of loops like this, these kind of learning loops, if you like. It's not a linear process like that. And where you've got more ambiguity in the process, often you'll end up with more learning loops that you need to go through. So it's quite important that you don't commit too much time and money to something that's just not a great idea. This is the way that we work with problems, whether they're small projects or large. The structure kind of works. But the key thing here for us is that UX research and testing can and should kind of happen across all these stages. But today's talk will be focusing on what we call usability testing, which is something we would often do in that second diamond that you can see there, the design and test part, where we're basically trying to design things right. And that's the kind of structure and the framework. And as we look at the next part of the presentation, just kind of be mindful that that's where we are in the process. So I'll hand over to you, Chloe.
Thanks, Gordon. So I am Chloe. As Gordon has introduced, I want to quickly, first of all, introduce this internal AND project to you guys, because this is like what we're going to cover throughout the presentation, use it as an example. So this is an internal AND product. So we call the system as a product because like we're product focused, user focused. And so we have a little bit background for this one. We in Somerville and digital, there are many clubs within and digital, and Somerville means that it's the club in Edinburgh, so we call ourselves Somerville Club. And we actually have a hot desk system in our club, and we currently use spreadsheet to manage the kind of resources, like for us to book a desk or other kind of resources. As you can see here on the right hand side, you just put your name down near the meeting booth or the meeting area. But then we found that there were some problems. For example, the spreadsheet was not responsive or it's not accessible for some people, and some of us are not actually taking the resources we book on the spreadsheet accordingly, or maybe not make a booking at all. So these are some of the problems we found in our existing product. And so what we try to do would be, we kind of identify this opportunity, which is a desk booking app, because we initially have an internal app anyway that's called Source of Truth. It's like a knowledge repository where we keep different kind of information within the company. And then the idea is to actually build desk booking functionality into this application so that we can manage the desk and resources and have the booking in the app rather than a spreadsheet. So we kind of identify this opportunity and the goal in the first diamond you saw in the diagram previously. So our product goal is actually to provide an easy and fair way to manage some of those clubhouse resources which employees will love. So after we've identified the problem and then the opportunity, which you've seen there in the previous slide, we actually go into this design stage where we go broad, and that is to ideate. So to ideate, we ask ourselves loads and loads of questions, as you might have before as well when you are looking at a problem and finding out solution. So based on these questions here, like who is our user and what do we know about them? How will they actually interact with the resources in the office? The ideation prompt, like how might we statement, the team then go into like an ideation session to come up with a bunch of creative ideas. With that huge quantity of ideas, it provide an opportunity for us to pick from those ideas. So we critique on different ideas, pick the good ones, so that we can then combine and converge into one design like this, what you've seen here. So this is a sketch, but you can see dots floating on the designs. It's actually the components that the team thinks is good compared to others. So this is kind of like a converged low fidelity wireframe design you see here. And then using more sophisticated tool like Figma, Adobe XD, InVision. I'm not sure does anyone here heard of those two? Yes, yeah.
Oh yes, all of us have.
Yeah. So using those two, the hi-fi design can then be like the low fidelity wireframe can then be turned into the high fidelity prototype. And then it would be then used for development or for what we are going to introduce next, which is user testing. To test whether the high fidelity prototype is actually what our ultimate solution would be. And usually it's not yet, because you don't think it's good enough until like some iterations of refinement until you get there. So it's kind of like a converged state at this point then. And similarly, regarding this prototype, like this high fidelity prototype, we have some more questions like, is it going to be something that we build and deliver? Do we need more improvement on it? Does the user actually like it? So to find out the answers to these questions, so we want to find it out directly from the users, but not by making assumptions. So I'm going to pass on to Gordon to talk about the user research.
Yeah, so I'll just give a bit of general background as well, and just to make sure we're all kind of on the same page around some of the terminology, because some of it kind of looks similar, but there's little bits of kind of subtlety in it, which I think are quite important. So user research is that kind of wide area, and it can be applied across the design lifecycle from a really early, what we call generative research. So that's where you don't really know what you don't know at that point in time, and you're just asking quite general questions, maybe through interviews or kind of observational studies and so on, all the way through into the kind of product testing that you might do within a live environment. So all of that is kind of research, and it lets us better understand, I guess, user behaviors, needs, motivations. And you can gather that definitely through observational studies, but also other forms of kind of feedback directly with users. And it ensures that the product is built upon research and facts, and not just kind of assumptions. So otherwise, you tend to get into that situation where the loudest voice in the room kind of ends up dictating where the design goes. So that user research, the early user research, gives the insights into what users want and what their pain points are. Usability testing, coming a bit later, looks at what users actually do and what they will do in context at a point in time with a particular product, often in its prototype form. The key thing there, though, is that often what users will say that they're going to do during that user research phase ends up not being the same as what they do when you actually give them the thing in their hands. So it's important that you try to close that gap as early as you can. So making that usability testing experience as focused and as realistic as possible often gives you a lot of confidence that you're actually going in the right route before you end up committing into a builds or a software development process, which is quite difficult to roll back from. So you want really to learn to short circuit things that are simply not going to work as early as you can. And that means giving users real world tasks. We'll use that word a little bit in the rest of the presentation, typically with a prototype before you get anywhere near build, and overall just gain a level of confidence, I guess, that you're not a million miles off where you need to be. It's all about ultimately eliminating bias, kind of the false consensus that you might get in a project team otherwise. If you're kind of just following your hunches, this is about being a bit more fact-based in terms of in terms of what you want to go live with. If you could move on, cool. So the first thing I'll say is there's a number of different usability studies that you can do. There's a number of different methods. The two on the screen I'll come to in a moment, because they're the ones where I think if you're on a low-cost mission, there's definitely some utility on those. The other one, though, that you'll often hear is moderated testing. So this is often used early in the design process, and it's where the researcher is typically present with the users that you want to test with, supporting that testing process and kind of being an observer in it. It's often seen in a user testing lab setting. The issue with it is that it takes quite a lot of effort. It's quite demanding, both in terms of time on the user researcher, but also on the participants themselves. You need to schedule it in, you need to find a place to do it. And I guess there's a reason why there are dedicated agencies that will kind of set all of that kind of thing up for you, but it definitely comes with quite a cost. Remote unmoderated testing, this is often the cheapest and kind of easiest option, I guess, to arrange. This is basically where people undertake tests themselves out there in the field, and if you do them remote, it means people can do it in their own time wherever they are. You don't need to gather them together to do it. In kind of simple terms, I guess it's essentially sending them a link to something that they go and click on, they work through something, and they provide feedback. And we'll show you how some of the tools can facilitate that kind of testing in a moment. So a key challenge, I guess, is also how to find users in the first place, and that's again not a small matter. Recruitment is a big thing, and I guess many of us that have worked on Scottish Tech Army projects will know that, you know, if the researcher or somebody like myself at the start says, oh, we really need to get some users together, I guess often we kind of assume that might just take a day or two, but weeks later we're kind of struggling to find people. So we can't underestimate that process. I think the other thing that therefore is quite useful to think about is this idea of guerrilla testing, which is maybe not being too choosy about who you want to test with, and, you know, going to kind of public places, public forums, and asking people whether or not they would be willing to engage in a piece of research. It requires a little bit more kind of creativity, I guess. You know, this is about possibly going into cafes, libraries, shopping malls, that kind of thing, and kind of picking people and asking if they want to do things. But it could also be done online. You know, it's something that you could do through online forums, you know, or even potentially through Slack channels. You know, if you're on Slack instances that are maybe not the STA's one, but another one. But what you're trying to do is to find unbiased groups, I guess, to kind of work with. You do obviously have to keep consent and ethics in mind and all of that. You know, you don't want to be trying to do research either covertly or you know, potentially kind of annoying people with this sort of thing. But it's something to think about. And a good place that we've found is often at events or places where you've already got people warmed up at an event or a talk. You know, you can even turn a talk itself into potentially a data collection route if you want to. Maybe once you've given somebody the presentation, you can ask them as a takeaway to follow a link or whatever to test something that you want them to test. If you could move on. So the next thing we're just going to talk about is a task, and this is going to come up in a moment in the demo. So I just want to be really clear that we kind of understand what this is. So a task and a usability test. So this is the kind of what of what we want to test. So and during the study, we'll do a number of things with the task. The task is given to the user basically as part of the test. It provides the context. We set out the kind of scenario and what we want the user to do in that task. And then we ask participants at the end of doing that to rate the experience in one way or another. We'll talk in a moment just about exactly how we kind of recommend doing that. And then you follow up on that score. So somebody scores it as being particularly difficult, you know, there's a bit of probing that goes on. It's the same kind of approach you would take if you were interviewing somebody. You know, you ask somebody about something and then you probe. So on the free tier, typically in these products, we're obviously concerned with getting the most for essentially no bucks. So it's really important to think about what tasks you want to test. You may have a limited number of tasks that you can test, and when we show you what we can do with Maze in a moment, you'll realize it's quite constrained in that sense. So you have to be a little bit clever about what you actually want to look at, get a little bit creative around what the constraints are. The way I often like to think about this is that you want to think, what's the riskiest assumption that you've got in this product that you're considering creating, and that's probably the thing that you need to be looking at in your testing. Or to reframe that, it could also be something that's particularly an opportunity. You know, it's the thing that you can see is the real heart of the product that you're thinking about. and those are the ones to go after. So not wasting your time maybe, and you know, the limited resources that you have in some of these free tiers on some of these products, going after things that are basically already proven. So, you know, something like a sign-in process that might not really be worth testing if there's something more critical to look at. So skip on to the good stuff, I guess, is basically the message there. If you could go on to the next slide, please. So the other bit that we need to look at here is just how we kind of pose the feedback questions. So one example of that is what we call a single ease question, and it's the one that we'll show you in a moment in the demo. So this is a question that's asked to participants after they've just completed a task. That's the reason for doing that is because it's in their minds, it's fresh at that point in time. And it's essentially a way of assessing how easy or difficult they found that particular task from their own perspective within whatever context they were carrying out the test. And then we typically will pair that with an open question where people can give some rationale, if you like, that sits behind why they've chosen that particular thing. The key thing, though, I think here, and in terms of, you know, being a bit constrained on some of these free tiers, is that you do get participant fatigue and you get a bit of a tail off. So if you end up with 20 different tasks for somebody to do, you'll get fantastic feedback up front on the first few, but as time goes on and people get a little bit tired of what they're doing and they feel it's maybe a little bit repetitive, they'll end up giving you less good feedback further in. So again, this is a case where maybe it's almost an advantage to have a bit of constraint here. You can really hone in on the questions you want people to answer and make sure you're getting the most valuable feedback as early as you can within the testing process. So, Chloe, I think it's back to you. Oh, no, it's still me.
Yeah, I think we will be going on to some. Oh no, I think you will be going on to some more about the tools.
I'll continue with these ones. Yeah, it's not quite the demo yet. So there are lots of tools out there, but I guess before you rush into deciding that you want to use a particular tool, it's important to really understand where you are in the design process, whether it is that early generative research or whether or not you're testing something that's maybe already gone live. There's potentially different tools which are more suitable for some of those than others. Also understanding whether it's quant or qual data that you're more interested in, whether you have the appetite to do moderated testing or whether or not unmoderated is more appropriate, and whether or not you think that remote or in person is better suited to what you want to do. The tools on the free tier all do these things in slightly different ways and offer you slightly different things. So there's a bit of a case of kind of getting used to what's kind of out there. Also worth saying that some of these tools, I mean, they change in terms of what they offer on the free tier as well. So you do kind of need to keep an eye on which are offering what. We noticed actually just in preparing this that Maze had changed what it allowed on the free tier in a kind of subtly different way as well. So they are kind of changing. It's often quite advantageous to look at some of the new products on the market as well, because they can be a bit more generous in terms of what they're willing to give initially. You know, they're obviously trying to hook users in exchange for your kind of feedback and kudos. So that could be a useful thing to explore as well. And yeah, just in terms of the tool that we're going to look at today, so it's called Maze. It's the one that we'll use in the demo. It has obviously a range of different kind of subscription models, as many of these tools do. We've used it on both the free and the paid subscription model, but actually on the free tier, it's been really quite effective for doing, let's call it basic usability testing, but it's still really valuable in terms of what it can do. It's very feature rich and it does everything across what they call the continuous discovery lifecycle. So that's everything from the early kind of generative research right through into kind of live product testing. Not all of those features obviously are available within the free tier. But the key thing, I guess, for us is that it does allow us to do unmoderated usability testing with design concepts. And it lets us work alongside our Figma prototypes and designs in a really good way. So that's what we're going to show you in a moment. So some of the limitations around are things like, the number of studies that you can do in a given month, how many responses you can get, and how complex you can make those tests. So in Maze, they have this concept of blocks, which Chloe's going to show you in a moment, but there's a limitation on that. The blocks are essentially kind of tasks that you can be going through, but we'll have a look at that in a moment. But it's still enough actually to do some quite useful things. I think that's me, Chloe. That's on to you.
Cool, thank you. So we are actually going on to Maze for some demo. So I think you should be seeing my maze screen now. Okay, all good. Yeah. So this is my free plan, my own kind of like account. So you can see it's saying like 0 active projects remaining because I have one already as an active project. And on the free tier, you can only have one maximum of like active project. But in each project, like so this one, you can have 3 mazes. So consider each maze as like a survey. So we can have 3 maximum. And what I'm going to show next is actually what I have here. The edit. So this is a round of kind of maze testing that I've done before. Let me just quickly move away the zoom bar. And then so you can see on here, these are kind of like the blocks that Gordon has mentioned as well. So in maze, there's the concept of a block, and each of these here is actually a block itself. And you can see there are different types of block. For example, the context screen, prototype test, opinion scale, open question, etc. And I think you're quite limited on the free tier on what kind of blocks you can use, but I think all of these listed here, you can use them even though you're on a free tier, so that's great. And you can use these blocks to compose your own kind of free maze to use for usability testing. And context screen is basically where you can put in information for more context to kind of preempt the user what they are going into. Generally, I would provide information that to assure them that what you're doing is actually beneficial for us for this product in moving forward. So it's kind of like an incentive for the participants to do it for free. And then also mentioning that there's no right or wrong answers to make sure it's not a quiz because some people view it as if. So it's good to kind of put it out there. It's like it's what you do here is kind of will be valuable in any instance. And then this is a prototype test block. And this is, I think, the highlight of the maze. So you can actually see, put a prototype in there. And what you can see is the result, but then we will create one ourselves later on, and then you will know more detail about it. You can see how you can test using this prototype test block, how a user interact with your prototype from start to finish. So this is like the starting screen and how they navigated through different screen, where they click on it. So this is very insightful. So next is opinion scale. So this is like just a kind of rating. We use this for the SQ question that Gordon has mentioned just now to test, like, get a measure of how they find the experience that they have just seen or experienced in that prototype test. So it's 1 to 7, and then they could rate on it. And we use the open question to collect extra feedback on why they rated it that way. Yeah, and I think these are kind of like the major blocks that I would use for maze test to really conduct the whole task. And what you could do here is that you can also invite collaborators, like invite different people in your team to kind of work on the same maze together. Yeah, and then we can all have a look before it goes live. And I also want to show the result and report on here. So you are seeing the report result page actually, but what you can see here is like it's very detailed. So you can see how an actual user, they navigate every screen specifically, so specific to that user, how many seconds they spend on this task, where they click. But I think if you go on to report, it's more high level, a generic view of how the overall test perform, how the overall performance of the prototype is, and they would have this unique kind of maze usability score that is automatically generated by Maze to kind of based on how they think the prototype is when it's experienced by the participants. And there's more like a generic view on here, but they've got like some interesting matrix where you can have a look after you've completed the task. Yeah, I think some more colorful and more high level kind of matrix there. I think I want to show the screen. interesting one. So this is one of the screen that we show to our user for this usability test. So this is actually the first screen they saw, the homepage of the whole mobile app, the desk booking app, or the source of truth knowledge repository app that I've mentioned. And you can see it's like a mess here. Everybody just rage clicking on the page, because what happened is like we are trying to get them to click on this resource on the nav bar, but I don't think they could locate it properly, and they're just clicking it anywhere. So I think it's a good kind of like lesson for us to kind of iterate on how we can improve that, how we can make this resource area more obvious to our user. Yeah, so I think that's like the first kind of demo, but I think I'm gonna have an exercise for you guys, and we can then go over how we set a kind of maze test together. So the scenarios, before we start kind of like this exercise, I want to show this kind of new designs to you guys. So this is like a different set of designs. This is like manage booking. So just now we have seen how user can make a booking using the app. Now we have introduced a new function. We want to introduce this new function, manage booking. So after they've made the booking, how can they manage that? Is there any improvement that the screen needs? Is it really that useful or convenient, easy for them? So we want to find out about the answers to these questions. So what we want to do before creating the maze is that formulate assumptions or hypotheses before, and then create the test on maze so that we could validate that. And to do that, I would usually use this simple table, just have like 4 columns for writing the assumption. So this is like an example. You have the mission that is basically the name for the mission, the name of the test. And then you have the assumption. The assumption would be like the question you want to be answered. In this case, we want to find out whether user will be able to change their book desk to a different desk on the same date. And then we will leave the validated and notes column empty. And then we could come back to it later on after the usability study concludes, to come back and see whether that assumption has been validated or not. And then notes would be any kind of like interesting things you find, anything that surprised you during the usability study. So we have the assumptions, and we can hop onto maze again to kind of work and create that maze task. So what I would do is back to the project phase and click new maze. So there are different templates you can use, and there are custom templates as well, but then they are kind of like other paid plans. So I would go for start from scratch. And you can see this is the screen you will see if you have no blocks, and if you are in the kind of like bold and edit mode in Maze. And I'm gonna add a block for my Figma prototype. Do you know which block should I go for? Does anyone have any idea? Based on the list you see here, based on what we have gone through. So we would usually go for the prototype block, even though there are a lot of blocks you can go for. Like, I mean, there are a variety of blocks like test, tree test, card sorting, but they are quite advanced. And I think for the mission for testing out whether a prototype would work in a usability study instance, you usually use the prototype test. And let me just quickly pull up the content. Bear with me while I bring up the stuff. So I've prepared based on what we have for design. I actually know what we want to test. So we want to test. So this one we actually want to test the functionality of manage your booking. And the description would be like seeing if they could actually change, give a specific date for them, and then see if they could change the desk from this desk to another. So what you want the user to do, just state it clearly, give them specific targets that you want them to do, and then you want to link your prototype. You can link different prototype. For example, we've got Figma here, but you can link your sketch prototype in Vision prototype. So I would use my Figma prototype. So use the link, and then you can import it. I'm not going to use the new method. So if the file is large, it would take quite a while, and I think there are some kind of enhancement on Maze as well that you could load a larger prototype with plugin. I am gonna use the normal kind of import method, and then on here, once you imported your prototype, you still have to indicate what's the expected path you want the audience, the participants to take. So this is kind of like setting the path you expect tester to take to complete this mission. And you will actually click on this prototype screen on the right-hand side to indicate that. So I want them to manage. I would change my starting screen first. So this is actually my starting screen, and I want them to manage the booking. So I expect them to click on this manage booking, and then to edit booking, and then select a new desk and save the changes and confirm. So that is how I expect my user to complete the mission or go about this task. And so I set it up on Maze as well. You can add more than one path. So if there are more than one ways in your application to do so, so you need to add all of them in here, but I only have one, so I will just leave it there. And that is my prototype test. And what you could do is to preview it as well later on. And I will only I will preview it with you guys, but only after I added other blocks as well. So what we want to do next is to add an opinion scale, which is for the SEQ question. So the opinion scale, it will be how would you rate this experience? And we don't need a note. We just need to change it to from 10 to 7. So there are you can set it up in a different way. Use this opinion scale for different users. Like if you want to rate it in the star format, or if you want to ask how they feel about it as well. So for our context, I just want to be very neutral and very easy to understand. A 1 to 7 scale would work for me. And you can also mark whether this question would be required or not. And for the next question, it would be an open question to ask like a free text. How did you why did you give that rating in the previous question? And then they could type their answer freely. Yep. It will be a text box, or you can restrict it to be a numerical, date, or email kind of input. But I think that would be it for my test. And this is really useful to kind of preview your maze so that you know what you can see exactly what the tester they would be seeing, and then it will not be recorded as well. So it will not be charged or anything. It's still kind of in the process of the build. So this is kind of a starting screen pre-populated by Maze. And then this is the task. So the user will be able to see the text, the context that the ask you have put in earlier. And then if you click get started, they will be able to navigate the kind of prototype in like an actual mobile phone, like really see it and interact with it as well. So what I want them to do is manage the booking, edit, and yep. So you can interact with the prototype successfully, and that's a good sign. And then the next question would be the rating question. Yep, it works again. A free text. And that's kind of like a preview for the maze that I've just created. And that would be it. Yeah, the kind of demo of like how it looked like and the result and how you can create a new maze. I will pass on to Gordon, and he could.
Yeah, I'll just say a few things. I mean, that's kind of the crux of the demo, and hopefully everybody saw how relatively easy that was to basically integrate your Figma prototype into Maze, and run a simple test like that. But that's the kind of thing that you could and should be doing as part of product development on any of the kind of Scottish Tech Army projects or things outside that. So just a slight call to action there, really, which is the third sector, and I guess most importantly, users of products and services developed in the third sector definitely deserve the best that we can do from a design point of view. Often users and beneficiaries are at their most vulnerable and kind of most in need. It could, of course, be any of us that kind of need those products and services. So our ask really is that we should make sure that the work we do through the Scottish Tech Army is as user-centered as it can be, and that we take these ideas out there, we evangelize them, we make sure that we kind of use them with any of the users that we're working with, and with any of the charitable organizations and so on that we're working with. User-centered designs for everyone. The drive to kind of make this happen, it can be shared by the whole team. It doesn't mean that it's just because you're a designer or a user researcher that you're excited by these tools. It's something I think that we can all benefit from. And then if we just move on to the next slide. So yeah, I mean, just in terms of a bit of a reflection, and I'll probably just open this up really to Q&A in a moment. There are various things, I guess, that we found have worked well as we've been kind of using some of these tools, like the one that Chloe showed you just there. Definitely deciding what kind of metrics you want to measure up front. That's a big one, kind of understanding what do you expect a product or a service to do, understand how you're going to kind of test for that. Running pilot tests, I think that's been something that's been quite useful for us as well. And Joe will probably know that I often say we should run a pilot before we kind of get into doing the research. So often running these things with 1 or 2 users is important. The trouble if you go out large on this and you go out to lots of users early is that you've affected that pool of prospective testers by asking them to do something. So you want to make sure that it's actually going to be right. Testing with a small number of people early is probably the way to do that, and then kind of hone your test for the wider audience. After that, make sure you're being inclusive as well, and that you've got within your participant groups, if you can, that you've got people that reflect a wide range of different kinds of people within that audience, so that you're testing for diversity and inclusivity, I guess, across groups. That's a few points. I don't know, Chloe, whether there's anything else you want to add, and then after that we can maybe just open up to any questions.
No, yeah, I think it would be good to have some questions. Anything you've seen just now, we could give you a show if you want to know more about anything. I guess that's yeah, that would be it.
Nice one. Thank you very much, guys, for that. That was brilliant. Really enjoyed that. I don't know, Joanna, if you'd like to, do you want to stop the recording just to give people a chance to ask questions if they don't want to be on camera?
Yeah, just I really want to thank Gordon and Chloe for going through that. It's always slightly tricky going through tools. So, appreciate that. It's a really good overview of how simple that can be. So thank you. I am going to stop the recording now.